The way that equality usually gets discussed, it's presumed to be an unambiguous moral good. It's just assumed that everybody is in favour of equality and that only some kind of weird fascist would be against it. But I actually don't think that's the case at all, and if you are in favour of equality as a principle, I think you really need to justify why you are, because it's not just self-evident. As I've discussed previously on this channel, I don't believe that equality guarantees a benefit for anybody. If you take a system that is unequal in its outcomes and try to change the structure and the rules of that system to make things more equal, there's just no guarantee that any of the people in that system will be better off than they were before. You could just end up making everything a lot worse. We see this in history in a lot of examples of countries that have implemented radical socialism, where they kind of succeed in the first step, which is to take the wealth from the wealthiest in their society, but somewhere along the way the wealth doesn't quite make it down to the poorest in that society who it was intended to help. This radical revolution was intended to help the very lowest, and yet they never really succeed in that part of it. You might say that these examples were failures to implement equality, but I would actually say that they were successes from the standpoint of what equality is on the face of it, which is to say they succeeded in making everybody in that society more equally miserable, although some people did end up being better off than the others. Even disregarding history, if we just look at equality from a theoretical standpoint, you can see that the easiest way to implement equality of outcome is to strip away wealth or whatever else it is from the people who have the most. And it's not even required that you should share it out with the people who have the least, because you've already achieved equality just by taking from the most wealthy. And you might think that sounds like an absurd strawman argument to suggest that that is what people who talk about equality actually want. But if you actually look at the things that people say when they advocate for equality, I think you can actually see that this way of thinking is in evidence. An example that I came across this week is from a podcast that I like quite a lot called This American Life. It's a very popular podcast, like one of the top 10 downloaded in the world. I find myself disagreeing with the way that a lot of the political stories are framed, because the hosts of the podcast, the people who sort of write the stories, or rather they find and report on the stories, they are, as far as I can tell, unanimously left-wing. So when they talk about politics, it kind of comes across, and I find myself disagreeing. It doesn't mean I don't enjoy the show, though. I do enjoy the stories. But this week I was catching up on some of the old episodes, and 2 episodes in a row evidenced this kind of thinking that I'm talking about here about equality. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to exactly recount both of these stories. If you'd like to listen to them, then I'll leave links in the description. Like I said, the show is quite good, and the episodes are quite enjoyable to listen to, in my opinion. But I do think I need to summarize at least one of these stories for you to understand what I'm talking about. The more recent of the episodes featured a story about a kid. The guy who's telling the story is an adult now, but he's recounting the story of when he was a child at I think it was primary school or American middle school. At his school there was a teacher who gave out fake kind of monopoly money instead of merits or points or gold stars the way a teacher might. This teacher actually gave a sort of monetary incentive to her students for behaving well or performing well in their homework, things like that. And this fake paper money could be spent at a sort of little school shop where they could buy little snacks and treats or stationery for school. But the problem that this little boy had was that he only had this teacher for one lesson, rather than some of his other students that he was friends with who had this particular teacher for many more lessons, or they were in her sort of teaching group, her form rooms they call it in the UK. And so these students who had this teacher a lot had more opportunities to get these rewards, this monopoly money they could spend on stuff that would make them, just snacks that they could eat or things they could buy that would make them kind of more popular. And he emphasizes this point that having this money was actually a kind of status symbol among the children. Anyway, he was understandably upset that he did not have the same opportunities as these other children who could buy whatever they wanted from this little school shop, and he was sort of getting by on just a few of these fake dollars. And so he complained to the teacher and said, it's not fair that these other students have more opportunities to get the rewards that I want. It should be equal among everybody. He wanted to change the rules, but the teacher just told him to work harder, and he found that answer very frustrating, and despite working harder, he couldn't get the results that he wanted, and he never got the rewards that he saw other people getting. And so he plotted this quite careful burglary of this teacher's desk to steal the fake money. And when he gets caught, his teacher is understandably really disappointed, but he explains again to her that he only did it because he was so desperate for this money, and that she didn't understand how unfair it was on the students to have these unequal opportunities, to get these rewards that they all wanted so much. And although he still gets punished, the rules are changed by the teacher so that the students can only earn the Monopoly money by attending this one particular class, so that the opportunity is completely equal among everybody. They can only get these rewards for one class a day or a week or whatever it was. Everybody has the same opportunity. And this was painted as a good outcome of the story. And the podcast host explicitly says that this story is a good analogy for how society works, where the people who don't have much money, don't have much material wealth, look at the system as being unfair, that they never had the same opportunity to become a millionaire or to enter the middle class even, and then that makes them angry and want to break the rules because the rules are unfair. And to be fair, I can see the logic in implementing this equality, this sort of equal opportunities in a school setting. It makes sense to want to give students who are all sharing one school more of an equal chance, perhaps. In the specifics of the story, I think it does make sense for the teacher to change the rules, even if I don't really agree with waiting for someone to break the rules before doing that, to be honest. I remember being that sort of age myself, and for us on the playground it was all about Pokemon cards, and we got in some pretty serious fights about people who had the best cards and people who didn't have, their parents didn't have enough money to buy them all the cards, and so they had not as many good cards, and they would trade them, and it would cause a lot of sort of drama that the teachers just didn't want to deal with. So Pokemon cards ended up getting banned. I know it's not quite the same story, but the point is that children don't have very much emotional intelligence, and so they get into sort of squabbles very easily, and just for the sake of harmony, it does make sense to make things just a little bit easier by giving everybody the same equal opportunities. It's probably best that children don't get quite so jaded at such a young age about the way the world works. But if we're talking about implementing this kind of equality in larger society, I think it's just a really terrible idea. The moral of the story is that it would be better if nobody was rich, rather than have only a few people who are rich. For people to be rich, there have to be people who are poor, or rather there needs to be people who are poorer. Having millionaires does not necessitate having people in poverty, but it does necessitate having people who are not millionaires. And since not everybody can be a millionaire, the moral of this story is that nobody should be able to be, and that the people who earn the most money, or in other words, they have the most useful skills, they do the most useful labor, they should not be able to have holiday homes and luxury cars and I don't know, Rolex watches. I don't know what rich people spend money on. They can't have. They can't send their children to prestigious institutions to get educated, that sort of thing. And it doesn't matter if any of those things end up benefiting people who are less wealthy. The most important thing is that the wealthy can't flaunt their wealth, and so the people who are less wealthy do not have to feel quite so put out by life. They don't have to feel that life is unfair to quite the same extent. To me, that seems like a really terrible idea. To implement equality for its own sake is just to indulge the very lowest emotions that humans can feel, and I think that emotion is plainly envy. Envy is such a relatable human experience that I believe it's probably natural in its occurrence. I don't believe we're taught to feel envy. I think it's just naturally present in humans from birth, and nobody exhibits envy more than children, which is kind of getting at what I said earlier. I think part of growing up out of childhood is to suppress the feelings of envy and to try to learn to be more gracious, to experience gratitude for the good things in your life rather than to look around and compare yourself to others and think of the things that other people have instead of being grateful for what you have already. In the Bible it says that you mustn't covet your neighbour's house or their wife or their ox or their ass. And I think that rule is about envy, about giving in to the sort of the darkest of your impulses. When you covet your neighbour's house, it means that you are envious of the really nice house that your neighbour has. And in the biblical sense, your neighbour doesn't literally mean the person that you live near. It just means, one of your peers, somebody that you know. And I think to envy somebody means that you not only want what they have, but if you can't get it, you will settle for that person not having it. You will settle for your neighbour losing their house or having part of their house destroyed rather than they continue to have it when you cannot have it. Envy is kind of the acknowledgement of disparity, to see that someone has more than you and to want to make that disparity smaller at whatever cost. It's not that important how that disparity gets closed as long as it gets closed. And for that reason, it's a very nasty emotion and it leads to very nasty behaviour. Unfortunately, since envy is probably natural and occurring in all people and it needs to be actively squashed, it will exist no matter how the society is structured or what rules are changed. There will always be differences in how people live and what they have, and it's just a sort of natural difference between human beings will result in envy no matter how the society is structured. And the people who allow themselves to be consumed by envy will always be miserable. It's just there is no surer way to make yourself miserable than to give in to your envious indulgences, in my opinion. If you want to be happy, you need to be introspective and you focus on yourself and your own improvement and your own action, not to be looking out at everyone else and judging them and comparing what you have to what they have. I don't think there's much good that can come from that. And so when I see people celebrating envy and calling it justice or calling it equality, it kind of annoys me. You hear it so often from socialists that millionaires and billionaires should not even exist without any further explanation as to why they shouldn't exist or why having a filthy, stinking amount of money is morally reprehensible. If you want to talk about how these people got their money or how they spend their money or what they're doing, if they're lobbying the government with it, then those are all very fine things to debate. But when the conversation starts and ends with these people have way too much money, I get very suspicious, and it does just sound like envy to me. And the thing that annoys me the most is that I believe the envy is completely misplaced, since I don't believe millionaires and billionaires are any happier for having millions or billions of pounds or dollars or whatever. Material wealth cannot make you happy, and I actually think that there are a lot of added complications that make material wealth probably a bad thing to accumulate. They'll probably make you miserable, if anything. I could make a video about that at another time if you express an interest in the comments, but that's just, I guess, my own personal belief. What I think is more backed up by the whatever evidence we have got on the subject is that above a very low amount of wealth, we should say, if you have enough money to keep a roof over your head, to keep the lights on, and to keep your stomach full of food every day, then there's really no added benefit to accumulating wealth on top of that. It won't actually make you enjoy your life anymore, which is one way of talking about happiness. And so it's completely nonsensical to envy somebody who has more material wealth or more money, a higher salary, a bigger house, because those things wouldn't make you happy, and they're probably not making that person happy either. Coveting your neighbour's wife at least makes more sense to me, on the level that having a really good wife is probably a better way of making your life happier than getting more money. So even though I wouldn't recommend coveting your neighbour's wife, it's definitely at least makes more sense to me. My point is that if you consider yourself a proponent of equality, I'm not saying that you're necessarily an envious person or that you're coming from a place of envy, but that it might be wise to look out for this kind of rhetoric among people who are trying to convince you of policy suggestions or just suggestions about how society should be reorganized. Because if it's reorganized on the basis of envy, it will not turn out well. The behavior that comes out of evil impulses will only ever be evil. And I think Churchill said it best when he said that socialism is the equal sharing of misery. When I'm having a good day and I'm feeling charitable, I think that the misery that results from socialism is just an unfortunate accident that happens, as a result of good intentions. But more often these days, I wonder if the intentions aren't so good, and maybe the intentions were bad to begin with, and that's why the result is always bad. Thank you very much for watching, and I would be very grateful if you would leave your thoughts in the comment section. I always love reading the comments under my videos, even if I can't respond to all of them. Have a good day, and I'll see you again soon.